Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Yeas and Nays. Hope you're enjoying a lovely Friday morning. It's gorgeous here in Lansing, nice blue skies. I'm told it's not going to feel like September, but I'll enjoy it anyway. So, hope wherever you are, it is pleasant as well. If you have not seen Yeas and Nays before, my name is Laura Ross, and I'm the Communications Director here at the Michigan League for Public Policy. And if it's your first time joining us, every Friday at 11, we take some time to break down what's happening in the state legislature, what's going on with the state budget, and then just what the league itself is doing to advocate for Michiganders. So if you joined us last time, you'll know that we released our new Kids Count in Michigan data book in August. And last time we had Ann Cunin, our Kids Count director, here to help us explore some of the data in the book and talk about some potential solutions to help kids have better outcomes here in Michigan. So if you haven't had a chance to see the Kids Count in Michigan data book yet, we'll drop a link to that in the comments for you. So that's what happened last time. And as always, if you have any questions at any point today, feel free to drop them in the comments and we will get to them. And if we can't get to them on the program, we will respond to you at a later date. So very excited for everybody to be here. And I'm really excited to bring on today's guest, Rachel Richards. And the last time we had Rachel on was, well, before the summer break for the legislature. So I'm going to bring her on right now and see how she's been doing. Good morning, Rachel.
Good morning, Laura. Happy to be here.
I'm so glad. Yeah, I think the last time we chatted, we were kind of anticipating this summer break. Um, but there was so much going on over the summer as far as different announcements from the governor's office and lots going on. And folks can tune in to the last episode of Yeas and Nays to kind of see what we did. We did kind of a nice recap of what happened over the summer, what we did last summer, and so they can take a look at that. But today, I want to just kind of move into a little bit more recent information. So, thank you again for joining us. I know you're here to talk about the 2024 state budget, but I thought I'd just see, I know you've been a very busy person all week, and I'm kind of curious, what kind of legislative highlights you can share that's been going on in the past week. I know there's a ton, so if there's just some highlights, that would be great.
Yeah, so I mean, the legislature came back right after Labor Day, and it's been, super busy, kind of gearing up for, the last kind of couple of months of a rush before, they adjourn for the year. This year, or not this year, this week, it was still pretty busy legislatively. The league engaged on a number of different issues that saw some committee action this week. For example, our senior policy analyst, Julie Cassidy, provided some testimony before the Senate Education Committee on a bill that would put into law the Universal School Meals Program. So, kind of providing an ongoing program that would provide school meals, healthy school meals for all, breakfast and lunch at school for all kids. And we were extremely supportive of this in the budget, and we're extremely supportive of the bill as well, knowing, it's hard for a kid to learn if they're hungry. And, for kids that don't have access to, meals from home, a universal breakfast or lunch program, it reduces the stigma of them getting meals in school, and allows all kids to be able to, to learn and have just a good solid education to kind of set them up for kind of long-term educational outcomes and health outcomes and everything. So we were really excited to submit some testimony on that. We also provided some written testimony in support of a package of bills that would create what is known as a prescription drug advisory board, and this would essentially take a look at some of our expensive prescription medications and kind of set, it would be an independent board that would set kind of reasonable and fair kind of caps on the cost of those prescriptions. We know, far too many families in Michigan and nationwide, are making tough decisions as to whether they can afford their, life-saving, potentially life-saving prescription medications, or whether they can put food on the table, or whether they can keep, affording their mortgage or their rent. And, families shouldn't have to make these decisions about all of the things that are necessary in order to live long, healthy lives. And so the PDAB, or Prescription Drug Advisory Board, would help more Michigan families to be able to afford the medications that they need, as well as be able to afford kind of their basic needs. The final thing that I'd touch on is the passage of legislation that would implement child-led testing. So making sure that all of our kids are tested for lead poisoning at certain increments throughout their infancy and toddlerhood, to make sure that we understand kind of the impacts that could have on their lives. We know, having had experience, unfortunately with the tragic Flint water crisis, you know, lead has horrible ongoing impacts on the lives of children, on the lives, and into their futures. And so understanding and making sure that we have responses put into place, for kids that are affected by lead, is just, it's critical to kind of just lifelong education, lifelong health of kids that are affected by it.
Yeah, really some great news coming out of the legislature this week. And I know you're following a host of other issues. I want to remind people that we can, sorry, I'm going to share a couple links here. One is to our Under the Dome section of the website, which has all of the updates that Rachel's talking about, but even some more talking about where the league is weighing in and what we're seeing as far as what's moving in the legislature. And we also have our testimony page, and that's a place where you can check out the testimony that the league is submitting on these various issues and our positions on them. So two very useful links there that you can bookmark just to check in. Those are updated pretty much on a weekly basis when we're in session, or possibly bi-weekly. So just good resources to have. So thank you for that little recap, Rachel. That was impressive. You kept it down. I know there's a lot more that you probably want to talk about, but I do want to make some time today to get into the budget. So first of all, can you just, for those of us who maybe missed last time, can you talk to us about when the budget was finalized and how that looked?
Yep. So the legislature finished their work on the state budget in the end of June. And then at that point, it was, enrolled and presented to the governor. The governor ultimately signed the school bus, or the school omnibus, which includes kind of preschool all the way up through community colleges and higher institutions of higher education, kind of that entire P20 system, I guess, that we look at in terms of education. And that one was signed, I believe, mid-July. And then in the end of July, the general omnibus, which covers all other State Department and agencies, was signed in the end of July. So she largely signed them without any line item vetoes. There were two kind of very small, in terms of numbers, specific projects, for a couple of, I think two agencies, that she ultimately line item vetoed, but largely, kind of signed the entire about $81 billion budget into law.
So it's a huge budget. It's an exciting budget. There's a lot of good stuff in it. And I know you and your team have been spending, again, in your downtime this summer, spending a lot of time unpacking this and doing analysis. And in that analysis, you've kind of come up with these buckets. And again, we'll drop a link to the final analysis later on in the program, but you've kind of divided it into buckets that make a lot of sense. So could we start with a look at K-12 and what that budget looked like?
Yeah, absolutely. So the K-12 budget actually benefited from a great eye towards equity in terms of how we're spending our dollars. And that's been a work that the league has been involved in for a number of years. We've also been very involved in a coalition of, kind of organizations, statewide organizations, local organizations, business groups that are really passionate about getting funding to the students in an equitable way. So one of the things that we were super excited about was not only a significant increase in our at-risk school aid program. So this is funding that goes to help students who are economically disadvantaged, funding for programs that help students who are homeless or migrant, who, or just who have a number of, things about their background that make them potentially at risk for academic failure. And so we got a significant increase to that. But on top of that, there was something put into place called an opportunity index. And so this really takes a look at the that funding allocation and takes into consideration not just the fact that these are kids who have grown up in poverty, but also the fact that concentrations of poverty have an impact on the resources that a school is able to provide. So, for example, a kid who grows up in poverty in my school district, East Lansing, has a very different life experience than a kid who grows up in poverty in the Baldwin School District in Lake County, or in Detroit, or in Flint or Grand Rapids. So, it's really trying to take a look at kind of how concentrations of poverty affect the learning outcomes for kids and target the funding to the kids who need it the most. So, everybody's going to see at least the same or the same percentage. It might not be the same amount because of based on pupil counts. But the anticipation is that it will ratchet up as that concentration of poverty increases. So again, targeting the funding to the kids who need it most in order to be able to access the same education as like my kiddo does. So that was one piece that we were really, really excited to see. And this is on top of increases in our funding for English language learners, and for increases in our funding for students with disabilities. So it's really taking a look at that weighted school funding formula that we've been pushing for a number of years and starting to make some significant steps towards that.
Yeah, very excited to see the way that that went through, and excited to see the results from it too. I mean, you can't deny that the needs are there. So very good.
Yeah. So, and then a couple of other areas that I would highlight is, there's some significant funding put into place around kind of academic interventions. We know, we're seeing data, year after year after year that just kind of highlights the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on, opportunity gaps, kind of deepening the opportunity gaps that existed even long before COVID. And so some additional funding was put into place to help with especially like third grade reading outcomes. And there was funding put into address literacy sub initiatives for the Detroit Public Schools Community District to fulfill the state agreement of the Gary B. v. Whitmer settlement. There was also some additional funding around kind of that learning loss or those opportunity gaps as well. So again, just really trying to put funding into the students and into the teachers that need some of that additional support in order to get kids into better educational outcomes. I mean, I know, when the National Kids Count book came out, Michigan was ranked 42nd in in our educational outcomes for kids. That's not bottom 10 is not a place where you want to be when we're talking about kind of the long-term education and career outcomes of kids. And so I think, the legislature and the administration really took a look at this budget and went, what can we do now in order to really benefit those kids long term? So hopefully we'll see some of the results of some of these, targeted investments in, opportunity gaps in third grade reading and, just the daily schooling of our kids too.
Yeah, and I think some of these are ideas that came out of this idea of learning loss during the pandemic, but I think it will be just as we discovered with some of the tax credits and things that were happening. These are things that should have been happening a long time ago, regardless of the pandemic. It's not as though Michigan was at the top of the pack and the pandemic came and we fell. I mean, it's time to continue these sorts of investments and strategies to really make sure that we're doing what's right by kids and teachers and families. It affects everybody. So
Yeah.
so that's a good summary of K-12. Let's talk next, while we're focusing on young folks. Let's talk about what's going on in early childhood investments.
Right. So we know kind of with the governor's State of the State address earlier this year, her big kind of goal for her second term was to move towards universal pre-K. And part of this budget included kind of that next step towards moving towards universal pre-K by, kind of one, increasing the number of students who would potentially be eligible for the 4-year-olds who would be eligible for pre-K programs, but also starting to look at, kind of 3-year-olds who could potentially benefit and kind of looking to doing a pilot program around that. And then, um, kind of taking a look at the fact that it's hard to, it would be one thing to increase eligibility and have a bunch of kids join, but if we don't have the slots, if we don't have the teachers, so kind of taking a look at um, what that market looks like and attempt to attract, recruit, retain, and provide some additional support for our 4-year-old pre-K program. I would also be remiss if I did not mention childcare. I mean, the league is an organization that takes a look at the entire 0 to 5 system, and we can't only support 4-year-olds without also looking at our 0 to 3. So, one of the good things that was within the budget for childcare was the maintenance of the income eligibility for our childcare subsidy program at 200% of the federal poverty level. That was something that we were expecting to decline due to the loss of federal funding, but we're able to maintain that with some additional federal funding that we received through our federal block grant that funds that. Um, we also saw I guess the one area that we did see maybe some loss in funding is related to reimbursement rates. As part of the federal ARPA dollars, the American Rescue Plan dollars that were allocated for our child care subsidy program, we were able to temporarily boost reimbursement rates for providers who saw kids that had subsidies or who provided care for kids that had subsidies. Unfortunately, the increase that we saw federally did not cover both income eligibility and those provider rates. So we are kind of on the precipice of a fiscal cliff for childcare as those monies are being pulled out. So we are going to expect a drop relative to current rates. They will still be higher than pre-pandemic rates. We did have funding that allowed us to do some ongoing rate increases, but we recognize that the volatility in rates does create some volatility within our childcare system, and makes it so that providers might not be able to provide the same amount or the same level of care, and if they can't provide the high wages or higher wages for their own workers, their own childcare workers, um, it creates a lot of instability within the system, and we are concerned about that loss of that higher reimbursement rate. So that's something we're watching, and we're kind of attempting to have a lot of conversations around, and making sure that the legislature really understands what the overall impacts that change will have on not only providers but also the kids that are in that care.
Yeah, that cliff is deeply concerning, and I know that we've got a lot of folks looking into that and working on it. So be sure to tune in, and we'll keep you up to date with what's happening on that. So moving now from early childhood, let's fast forward to the other end of K-12 and talk about post-secondary ed.
Yeah, so one of the big exciting things that we saw within post-secondary ed was some increase in funding for our uh, tuition financial aid programs. Sorry, mental block right there. Um, the budget last cycle started up a new kind of scholarship program that is supposed to help Michigan, kids to better be able to afford post-secondary degrees either in community colleges or higher education. And that was the Michigan Achievement Scholarship is what I think it's called. So we did a significant one-time deposit in that fund for the first year, and then it saw an additional deposit into that fund this year in order to really start stepping up and providing those scholarships to college students. We know, the cost of college also often serves as a significant barrier to kids, especially high school graduates of color. And, trying to figure out ways to make college more affordable and accessible for kids is just really important, especially as we move towards the governor's goal of having 60% of, the adult population have a post-secondary degree or credential by the year 2030. So recognizing that the cost of accessing even community colleges education and our typical four-year degree granting universities, that's just a barrier, and that we need to do more in order to help our high school graduates to be able to access and afford college.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of energy in this right now, especially as we're talking about Michigan's population growth and what do we do to gain and retain residents. I think this is such a critical part of it. I did want to note, since it's time for kids to start applying to colleges, there's a couple of exciting things that our partners over at Michigan College Access Network have been promoting. One is that there's a pretty lengthy list of colleges that are waiving application fees in
Mhm.
October. And also a new program where many colleges, our colleges and universities, are accepting any student with a 3.0 grade point average or higher. So that's really exciting news. And you can go check out MCAN's, MCAN, Michigan College Access Network's socials and their webpage for more on that. Just some exciting stuff as
Yeah.
we see kids, again, especially these kids who, started out high school, if I'm doing my math correctly, this year's seniors started high school virtually, I believe. So I think this is, it's good to see a little bit of a light at the end of that high school tunnel, providing.
Yeah, that was some very exciting news that came out this week, was those 10 Michigan colleges and universities that started, out of, kind of doing some acceptance of kids that were, of high school graduates with a 3.0 or above. I mean, that one step helps break down some of those barriers
Yes,
because, kids that, might not think that they might even not be able to be accepted to college based on a GPA. Or be able to, kind of, it just like takes out that first kind
absolutely.
of barrier to these kids. So
Yeah,
very exciting news out of the post-secondary world today. So
yeah. So next, I just want to go into kind of the league's, I guess I would say, bread and butter. What we work on extensively is talk to us about what's in the budget regarding basic needs. What is it that is going to help Michiganders make ends meet when we know so many are struggling in that area.
yeah, so one thing that we didn't focus on in the budget, but I'll kind of highlight going back to kind of the work that we did earlier this year was the expansion of the earned income tax credit, or increase to the earned income tax credit. Um, It's not, I mean, it has an impact on the budget because, as more money goes out in terms of income taxes, it has a budget impact in terms of the amount of funding that we have. But this is something that is smart investment in Michigan working families and Michigan kids, and really helps families to be able to make ends meet. That one piece, provides an additional potentially up to, on average about $600 for the average EITC recipient, an additional, $600. And I mean, obviously it could be more depending on your own, personal circumstances for families that receive it. So that goes far in being able to afford groceries, gas, childcare payments, doing a fix to a vehicle and whatnot. So while that's not necessarily a piece that we focus on is focused on in the budget. It's something I think is just really important to highlight right now because it is something that is direct cash into the pockets of qualifying families to help them make ends meet. Um, Largely, I mean, in terms of kind of direct cash assistance programs, they were kind of largely maintained, and we didn't do any significant increases or changes to our cash assistance program. It is something that the league has been working on. We recognize that our cash assistance program does not reach enough families. We are significantly down from where we were about a decade ago. In terms of the reach of the program, it also doesn't it hasn't kept up with inflation, and essentially we are relegating families to very, very deep poverty in order to be able to access basic cash assistance. So that's one area where we think the budget may have not gone far. We don't think the budget went far enough. They did, again, kind of maintain some of the enhancements that they have done through the diaper assistance program, through the clothing allowance, and through the young child supplement for those that are under the age of 6. But by and large, that cash assistance program was just kind of largely maintained. The one place that we're going to we're starting to see some exciting news is the budget included funding for a pilot project called RX for Kids or RX Kids in Flint. And this is essentially would provide like a one-time payment for pregnant people, um, and then provide a monthly supplement or a monthly payment for kids up through the age of 1. Um, so it will be, again, a program that will take a look at the outcomes that kids have when they're receiving, or outcomes in kids and families that receive kind of direct cash payments to really be able to help them make ends meet. So we're really excited to see this pilot occur over the next couple of years, and kind of see the outcomes that we have when we're providing, again, families the cash that they need in order to make ends meet.
Yeah, thank you for that rundown of that. Just so much to go through. I did pop into the comments a paper that our former senior policy analyst Peter Ruark wrote on how we can improve FIP and cash assistance in Michigan. I think that we're fortunate things were maintained, but we know that there's so much work to be done there, and so much that Michiganders need. So, well,
To
I
say
guess,
there
yeah.
were some pieces within the kind of basic needs where we did see some increases, and that was, we did see an increase for the Double Up Food Bucks program and food access. There's some additional funding for a pilot program to cover delivery costs associated with online SNAP purchases. So, for
Yeah.
example, we know that SNAP can be used to purchase food for delivery, which is important for people who might be sick or have disabilities, or who
Right.
might be elderly and might not be able to go out to the grocery store, who might not feel comfortable going out to the grocery store, especially as we're seeing kind of this wave of COVID go on right now.
Mhm.
Um, and that, but unfortunately, if they can't afford the delivery charges, that allowance doesn't necessarily make it work. So we're hopeful to see, kind of some of those improvements help, um, you know, those families afford food and whatnot. And the last area I'd highlight is, there were some investments within housing. We saw earlier this year the creation of a dedicated revenue stream for our Housing and Community Development Fund that will help fund access to accessible and attainable housing for a lot of families with low incomes and family persons with disabilities. And so, yeah, there is a lot of good things that are very equity focused within the budget, and obviously some areas where we need to kind of look going into next year, on what we can do next. So.
Well, that's such a perfect segue, Rachel, because that's what I want to ask you about next. Looking at this 2024 budget, there's so much good stuff in there and so many things that are going to help improve outcomes for Michiganders, especially Michiganders with low incomes. But we know there's a lot more ahead that needs to be done. So uh, I'm going to drop a link to our budget basics page where we can kind of see the budget cycle and how we're doing.
Mhm.
So just as we're finishing up this analysis of the latest budget, we are starting our advocacy around the 2025 state budget, which seems just so bizarre to say those words out loud, but it's happening. So, what's bubbling up for you? What do you see us really needing to focus on as far as priorities for that next budget, 2025?
Well, I mean, obviously, the one area that I just talked about was, kind of the reform of our cash assistance program. That's someplace where we have had a lot of need for reform there over the last, I mean, like I said, the caseloads or the reach of the program has dropped so far in about the last decade, and we know that it's not reaching all of the families that it should and that it could. We spend the federal block grant that we get for basic cash assistance on other very important things, but maybe that if we were able to kind of shift around other state dollars to cover those things, like um, college scholarships for Michigan families, and whatnot. If we could free up some general fund for those programs, it would allow us to be able to put more back into the pockets of, Michigan's lowest income families. So that's one area where I think we'll start seeing, where we could definitely make some huge gains if we, had the if we could do some reforms around that. And then honestly, I mean, some of it is honestly, we're kind of all waiting to see what happens with the Growing Michigan Together Council. I know, we've talked about the Growing Michigan Together Council probably a couple of times. Monique Stanton, our president and CEO, is currently serving on one of the work groups. And uh, I think the council will come out with a lot of different recommendations that will all have, investment requests tied to them. So we know we have holes in terms of infrastructure, water infrastructure, broadband, typical roads and bridges. We also have holes in terms of K-12 that still exists, or pre-K-12 that still exists. We have needs within higher ed. And then we have needs within kind of just providing for Michigan's workers. So we do expect that there to be some recommendations come out of that, that we'll have to take a look at and see where kind of some of those the where we could potentially get the biggest bang for our buck in terms of that support. One thing that we didn't talk about in terms of the budget updates, I know that this one is, we don't have this one on our website just yet, but it's, we did some really good movements in healthcare and health access within the budget. And that's, it's another area where there were some things that weren't done there. So one of the recommendations that we had was really around continuous coverage for Medicaid, for Michiganders who receive Medicaid, so a lot of them for adults. And then if we could provide that continuous coverage, something that we're seeing like right now as we're doing that Medicaid unwinding, and as people are getting disenrolled from Medicaid because that they didn't get their notice that they needed to do this, or they didn't receive the right documentation. Providing some continuous coverage would create some stability in that, at least for a year or two, to allow more Michigan families kind of the ability to be able to access healthcare without it becoming too expensive. So that's an area where we're kind of taking a look at and seeing kind of what the impacts would have on Michigan families, and kind of the impact it would have on our workforce as well. So
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. And I do want to let viewers know that the final two pieces of analysis, I believe corrections and then health and public health, will be up by Monday. So those will all be completed, and you can kick back and, oh, no, wait, you are starting on next year's cycle already. So, but while I've got you here, is there anything else you want to share with our viewers, something that they should really be keeping an eye on, whether it's federal or statewide? What do you
yeah.
want us to watch?
So obviously, one of the big things that we're watching is kind of the federal budget discussion, and there is I mean, there's a potential risk on the horizon for federal shutdown. And it's something that we are watching kind of very closely in terms of the negotiations that are happening between Congress and the president and his administration. So, we are kind of keeping track of that. Should there be, furloughs, what the impact would have. And another federal thing that we've been watching is the reauthorization of the Farm Bill. And that's really important because it provides for those food access programs. So it provides the funding for SNAP. It also provides the funding for WIC, which really helps, pregnant people and, infants and children to be able to access, just basic groceries and basic needs. And, there is some potential concerning discussions around cuts to these programs, and, trying to make sure that folks understand the impacts that these would have long term should these cuts go into effect. So those are kind of two federal issues that we're watching. Legislatively, we expect there to be a busy couple of months up ahead, kind of in terms of at the state level. Um, there's a number of health issues, like I said, kind of that we've weighed in on over the last several weeks, and we're hoping to be able to get across the finish line by the end of this legislative year, and kind of doing a lot of work around that. We, engaged in some conversations around the Reproductive Health Act, in alignment with our support of Proposal 3 and kind of breaking down the barriers to reproductive health and health access. Um, barriers that just shouldn't exist but currently do. Um, and so that's another issue that we have been watching legislatively, and kind of watching to see when the legislature ultimately adjourns for the year. That's kind of the big question that we have. Um, there were a number of pieces of legislation that were passed earlier this year that didn't receive immediate effect. And so those won't take effect until about 3 months after the legislature adjourns for the year. So when looking at timing of things like the presidential primary next year or some of the election reforms that we need to put into place because of Proposal 2, um, those are all things that we are kind of, that we're all waiting for that adjournment date to see when these things will ultimately take effect.
It never slows down.
Nope.
Thank you so much for being here today, Rachel. I encourage you to take a little bit of break from the stack of work you have on your desk, but I know that you won't because you're a machine. Thanks again for being here, and we hope you'll come back on in a couple of weeks.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you. All right. So that was great. It was always so wonderful to have Rachel on because she is such a wizard and understands things and can explain them so clearly. So if you have any questions, if you're watching this in a replay, feel free to drop those in the comments and Rachel can answer them or someone on our team can take a look and answer them. Maybe even I can answer one. Could be. I did want to just alert folks to a couple of things league-wise that you might want to know about, and both have to do with events. So for the last couple of decades, we have always had our public policy forum in the fall. This year, we are deciding to shift that forum to the spring. It just seems like a more natural fit for the kind of work that we're doing at that forum. So please look, we do not have a firm date yet, but you'll be getting a save the date, whether it's on social or in your email if you subscribe to our emails. So that public policy forum, which I'm really excited to be able to announce the keynote speakers. I'm not able to announce it yet, but next week I should have an answer on that, and it's going to be cool. So that will be coming up in March is our public policy forum. And then we are we are going to continue to do our Champions for Kids event. It was a great success back in August. This is where we launched the latest Kids Count in Michigan data book and data. So that will also be taking place toward the end of next summer, late August, early September. So keep your eyes and ears peeled on that as well. I just wanted to make sure folks who've come to our forum in the past know that that is moving now to March, and we're excited. So On that note, my dog is barking, which means it's time for me to sign off. I appreciate everybody tuning in, and we'll see you next Friday.